Alright, so Hoyoverse have essentially put out Mydei's kit. You can literally play him in the demo in the story, which means you can take a look at his kit, abilities, stats, even some of his traces are chilling there, waiting for us to see in all of its glory. So let's take a look at what this guy's got going on, whether we want to save for him, pull for him, or not. He's an HP scaling character, so he's a little bit different, and it's definitely worth taking a look at what he has to show us before we invest into the character. But first, if you like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe to the channel. We're about to hit 9K, and of course, we'll be making the push towards 10K after that, which will be the channel's first, real milestone. And we do cover a bunch of different gacha games here. Okie dokie, so let's take a look at what Mydei has going on within his kit based on what we saw from the demo, because it basically lets us know most of what we need to know about the guy. It shows us his skills, his ultimates, and everything, and it even shows his traces here too. You see bloodied chiton, or bloodied chiton, I don't know how to pronounce that properly, but it increases his crit rate by 48%, charge percentage from enemy targets damage by 100%, and incoming healing by 29.99% when restoring HP. This could be capped because this is the in-game build, and they probably made it pretty decent so that you get a decent feel for how the character actually operates. And this is going to be coming from one of his traces because it doesn't come from buffs from his skills, because I'll show you in a second what his skill and other abilities are in a second. Forget about Araya and forget about tonal resonance. That's actually just something from old what's-her-face Robin. So just disregard that here. But earth and water, as you can see down here, this is, while in the Vendetta state, Mydei will not exit the Vendetta state when receiving a killing blow. This current HP is reduced to a minimum of 1, so we don't know how many times publicly that this can trigger while he's in the Vendetta state, but if he does, for whatever reason, come out of the Vendetta state and then go back in, we can naturally imagine that this will reset the effect. So as far as I know, these are just a couple of his traces. He's probably got another one, right, or some important, stat traces. But this is important to get into, I think, before we get into the actual skills and abilities, which we can take a look at here. Oh, so let's take a look at his skill here. It has the deaths are legion, regrets are none. It's a blast damage ability. The ability cost is that it will take 50% of his current HP, and the toughness reduction is 20. And it consumes HP and deals imaginary damage to one designated enemy unit and minor imaginary damage to adjacent targets, which is what a normal blast damage ability would have. But if you notice, it takes away some of his HP. He's obviously going to be an HP scaling character. He's going to be a DPS. So if you guys have been junking away, trashing your, defense and HP crit substat pieces, you've been making a mistake. I've been saying this since, Blade came out. Do not trash your crit-based HP and defense pieces because they still have value for characters like Mydei, for characters like Fu Xuan, for characters, that scale on alt scaling abilities. Anyways, let's take a look at this King Slayer Be King. It's a blast ability. Ability cost 35% of his current HP. Toughness reduction is 20. This is going to probably be like an enhanced skill, right? This is common for certain characters when they go into an enhanced state, that they will have different versions of their skills or other abilities, or potentially basic attacks depending on what type of character they are. In his case, it looks like it's going to be a skill. It consumes HP by an amount equal to 35% of Mydei's current HP. It deals imaginary damage equal to 110% of Mydei's max HP to one enemy, and imaginary damage equal to 66% of Mydei's max HP to adjacent targets. Now, if you guys didn't already see by this point, he's obviously an HP scaling character, so certain buffers aren't going to necessarily work too well with him. If they're like Robin, who's an attack scaling or has a super big attack buff, it's not like you couldn't use Robin, but you're probably going to want to use somebody more like Ron May, or somebody that has a damage buff, or like a crit-based buff, or an HP-based buff, rather than somebody that has an attack buff, because he's basically going to get not a whole lot off of that, right, since he scales off of HP. Also, if the current HP is not sufficient, using skill reduces Mydei's current HP to 1. This ability will be automatically used. That this automatically will be used situation is basically a result of him going into his ultimate, which we find out through the demo, of course, because if you guys played him in the demo, when he uses his ultimate, he goes into this enhanced state. And it kind of, I don't know if I like it, actually, because it forces him to act and you're not allowed to control him when it's his turn. I'm not too big a fan of this because there will be moments where, you know, maybe there's a positive trade-off to it where, like, because he's so good in certain synergies that it doesn't matter that you're using him a certain way or not. You're going to end up wanting that anyway. But I don't like that we can't control him during his turn, because if you have a single brain cell up there in your mind, you'll be able to play better than the auto system will. And it's a bit unfortunate that he is not controllable during this enhanced state. In my opinion, this is a major downside to the character. I wish it wasn't like this personally. I wish you could control him during his enhanced state. Anyways, let's take a look further here. Godslayer be God. It consumes 150 points of charge. Toughness reduction is 30, sorry. It's another blast damage ability, consumes 150 points of charge, deals imaginary damage equal to 280% of Mydei's max HP to one enemy, and imaginary damage equal to 168% of Mydei's max HP to adjacent targets. This ability will be automatically used while this ability is in use. Charge cannot be accumulated. That's another bummer, but again, maybe that's how they balance the character out. Maybe they were testing him out and certain synergies cause him to maybe potentially gain too much. I do want to point out, obviously, this is the more powerful version of his ability here, but it seems like he's got 3 different versions of the skill that could be used. And again, once you go into your ultimate state, they're basically chosen for you. Knowing what this does is important, I suppose, but unfortunately, you have no control over how it goes per se, which is an unfortunate thing about the character. In fact, I think it's easily the worst part about his kit. I don't see why we're not allowed to, like, control the character. Even if the auto system would have been set up really well for him, there's plenty of moments where I have a feeling we wouldn't have necessarily wanted to make the choice that the auto system does when he's in his enhanced state. So I just needed to point that out. This is definitely a downside. Now let's take a look at this ultimate, which is called Throne of Bones, and it has a really cool animation. I just wish that with the animation that you got to see, like, more of him when it's used. I wish it was a little bit closer when he sits on that throne, but that's just a personal, personal preference of mine. Anyways, it has an energy cost of 160, so it's not low, it's not omega high, it's somewhat reasonable. I think it's fine. The toughness reduction is 20, and it restores HP and accumulates talent's charge. It deals massive imaginary damage to one designated enemy and imaginary damage imaginary damage to adjacent targets, then taunts the target and their adjacent target. So you don't see any multipliers or anything like that on this, unfortunately. I don't know why they didn't show that, but it does deal a pretty decent amount of damage. It's obviously very helpful for your damage output on the character, and as you can see, it restores HP. So this helps keep him alive. He's yet another destruction character that deals damage to yourself or to, like, the team. In his case, he's dealing it to himself, but he's able to restore HP on his own as well, making him very reliable. He also pretty much can't die unless you're outside of his enhanced state. As long as you're in his enhanced state, it's very, very unlikely that he will die while on your team. It's possible, but it's rather unlikely considering he will only go down to 1 HP, and he has this ultimate that heals himself. So he's not going to be too reliant on a healer. In my opinion, because he's going to be a very, very good Casterus sub-DPS on a Casterus team, you're probably still going to end up running a healer with him anyway, because Casterus wants a healer in most cases. There will be cases where you don't necessarily need the healer, but we're talking about zero cycling kind of content stuff with that. In most cases, you're going to run a healer with Casterus. And so, because that's going to be his best team, at least for the foreseeable future, you're probably going to end up running him with a healer anyway, but I just wanted to point that stuff out. Now let's take a look at this talent. It's called Blood for Blood, and an important part of his kit. When losing HP, he accumulates charge, and when charge is at 100, he enters the Vendetta state and restores HP and advances his own action. During the Vendetta state, max HP increases and defense remains at 0. At the start of this unit's turn, he automatically uses Kingslayer be King, and when charge reaches 150, during the Vendetta state, Mydei immediately gains 1 extra turn and automatically uses Godslayer be God. When Mydei receives a killing blow, he exits the Vendetta state. So this is like a really strong effect, obviously, because his own personal damage does not necessarily seem like it's going to be all that good on each hit, but because he's going to give himself several extra actions, it's actually going to accumulate to a pretty decent amount. Unfortunately, in the demo, it's a bad representation of how strong he will be because you're locked to using whatever build they give you. And as you can see from his stats, the build doesn't necessarily seem all that strong. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the relics used in the demo build, but there's a really high chance that you can build a better Mydei than you see here in the demo, dealing more damage than this Mydei is able to deal. It's a bit hard to say how strong he will be on release, but looking at his kit, it does seem cool, it does seem fun, and I think people will be surprised that he's not going to be a damage per screenshot type of character. He's not going to hit some outrageous number that you can show your friends, okay? But he is going to deal a decent amount of damage as the battle goes on. Kind of like DOT used to be before it fell off, you know what I mean? It's not literally a damage over time character, but it's one of those moments where as the battle goes on, by the end of it, he will deal some pretty good damage. Now, of course, let's take a look at his technique here. Cage of Broken Lance. Pulls in enemies within a certain area and inflicts daze on them. After attacking dazed enemies and entering battle, it deals minor imaginary damage to all enemies in the form of an AoE, and it taunts the targets. This unit accumulates talent's charge. So Bro is going to be yet another destruction character that has, you know, some pretty decent taunt value because A, he's a destruction character, so he naturally already has a higher taunt value, but he's also going to want to be like the sort of tank on your team, I guess you could say. A lot of preservation characters like to be the tank on a lot of teams, but when you have a character like this, it sort of like encourages you to use a healer instead. That's how a lot of HP scaling characters will work a lot of the time. So he can act as the tank on your team, considering healers, for example, don't have a high taunt value. So he's essentially the tank on your team when you have him on your roster. Now let's take a look at some other stats here that we have with this build. The base speed for Mydei, in case you guys were trying to, you know, pre-farm some speed tuning pieces, he has a 95 base speed, a stat, which is really low. I'm not gonna lie, that's rather low. There's plenty of destruction characters out there that are like this, that have relatively slow base stats because they're kind of the tank on a lot of teams. But you might want to build a ton of speed on this dude depending on what team you're trying to go for with him. As you can see, even their build that they used in the demo has plus 42 speed, so that he's at least sort of like a medium speed character. He's gonna reach that 134 speed threshold, making him not too slow, not necessarily too fast either. He has some pretty decent HP, which makes sense. He's an HP scaling character. And as you can see from the build, they also give him a ton of HP in order to keep his health really high. Yet again, another reason why he's going to be so good on a Casterus team, because Casterus is going to be an HP-based type of character as well. She's going to get benefits off of you having characters on your team with her that have a ton of HP, which is exactly what Mydei is all about. That's another reason why Tribby will also be good on a Casterus team. I bring this all up because Casterus is a very popular character, and yeah, she's gonna be kind of like the follow-up attack dream team of Ampharis. What I mean by that is the follow-up attack team for a lot of people is too expensive of a team to have all of the premium characters. They call it the fart team, right? Because you got Fei Xiao, you have Aventurine, you have Robin, and you have Topaz as kind of like that Exodia of the follow-up meta. And Casterus and, you know, Mydei and Tribby, for example, seem like they're going to be three pieces to a very strong HP-based team. So this is also going to be yet another expensive style team that is going to really want a lot of investment. So I wanted to forewarn you guys about the Mydei situation, Casterus situation. You know, Tribby doesn't need to be on these teams to be strong. So I consider Tribby to be a very high value piece for your account. If you guys aren't doing it yet, I highly suggest to pick up Tribby. She's very strong, works on a ton of different teams. But let's continue taking a look at some of these stats here. He has a crit rate stat of 87.2, which is very respectable. Crit rate is so important. If you don't have high enough crit rate, you will not crit, and your crit damage might as well say fucking 0, because if you are not critting, your crit damage doesn't matter at all, okay? So have a decent crit value stat. He, thankfully, gives himself a ton of crit rate within his own kit, making him much easier to build. So I have a feeling plenty of you guys will have a much higher crit damage stat than this, because it will be rather easier to build him. He's an HP scaling character. Those characters are usually pretty easy to build because you can focus on getting good HP substats, which most people don't usually care about on a DPS, but with him, it's one of the most common, substat drops, makes him much easier to build. Having a lot of crit rate within his kit also makes him really easy to build. I have a feeling that most people that are like kind of sweaty or even potentially kind of casual will probably have a better build than what you see here. So this is why some people in the demo probably feel like he wasn't that strong, because this is not exactly the greatest Mydei build that I imagine seeing. I have a feeling y'all will be much stronger than this. So yeah, obviously we'll learn more when the character preview comes out less than 2 weeks from now, but it is cool that we get to see him and play him and test him and find out if we even like the dude, with plenty of time to find out if you don't even want to farm his gear or anything like that, if he's not something that you're interested in. So a W to Hoyo on that one, because Hoyo doesn't always let us do that type of thing before a character comes out, so this one's kind of cool. He's obviously going to be a very strong sub DPS on a casteress team. Obviously, she's going to be the main DPS, but I don't know right now how I feel about him on a hyper carry team, considering he's an HP scaling character, which makes him a little bit limited. You're not going to necessarily want to put him with characters that buff with attack-based stats. Characters that have, solid damage buffs, like, let's say, Sparkle could work, for example, Bronya, Ron May, characters that have crit-based stats and damage-based stats. Those are all going to work perfectly fine, no problems there. But some characters that will have attack-based buffs and things like that might not have as much synergy with him, making him slightly more niche, right, than other DPS characters. So he's going to seem like a really good, solid, sub-DPS on certain teams or on dual DPS teams, but I'm not too sure, again, how I feel about him on hyper carry. But anyways, if you guys like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.